After my parents passed, my mother-in-law tried to replace me with her favorite niece. Days passed. When I found her wearing my mother's wedding ring, she whispered, "This belongs to someone classier." Last night, while packing the last of my things, my husband Callum sat on the couch pretending to read an article on his phone. I said, quietly, "You knew she took the ring." He didn't look up, didn't say anything for a moment. Then he muttered, "It was just a ring, Alina. Just a ring. It was my mother's wedding ring. She died 6 months ago. My father died before her. I am an only child. That ring was all I had left that held both their hands at once." Callum's mother, Irene, had taken it from my drawer and worn it around the house like a prize, telling me it belonged to someone classier, while her niece, Maura, made herself at home in my kitchen. And I still stayed. I stayed until I couldn't pretend anymore. Until I overheard the plan they were making to nudge me out. To erase me. Here's what happened. After my parents died, I didn't just lose them, I lost my anchor. My dad, Leo, was the kind of man who made everyone feel safe just by being in the room. He died suddenly while hiking a trail he'd hiked his whole life in Pisgah National Forest. His heart gave out on a ridge with the best view of the valley. My mother, Judith, had been struggling with Alzheimer's for a couple of years by then. But after he died, she just stopped. Stopped eating, stopped speaking much. Within half a year, she was gone too. They were everything to me. My childhood was stable, warm, and full of books, porch swings, and overcooked Sunday roasts. I never realized how rare that was until I married into a family like Callum's. I met Callum in college at UNC Asheville. He was smart, ambitious, and driven, everything I admired. He worked in tech consulting, had a startup dream, and his eyes crinkled when he laughed. We were married for over a decade. But Callum was. Well, I didn't know then how much of him was a product of Irene. His mother, Irene, was polite in a way that often masked the sharpest judgments. Her voice never rose, but her words could cut glass. And she always seemed vaguely disappointed in me, even when smiling. The kind of woman who complimented my shoes only to note they made my ankles look a bit thick. I used to think I was imagining it. Now I know better. After my parents died, I was a mess. I took time off work at the library, started grief counseling, and mostly just moved through days like a fog. Callum initially tried to be supportive, but I could tell it was wearing on him. Then Irene started visiting more. At first, she'd bring over a casserole and stay for an hour. Then it turned into staying overnight because the drive was long. Then she had a drawer in our guest room. Then she had keys. And then Maura showed up. Maura was Irene's golden girl. Her niece is from Atlanta. Blonde, poised, always perfectly dressed, even when casually dropping by. She worked in pharma sales, which Irene would constantly describe as so much more elegant than managing books in a dusty little library. She had been at our wedding. I remembered her then as warm but a little theatrical. But now, she was everywhere. Irene invited her to Sunday dinners, got her involved in helping Callum with branding for his startup, even started suggesting Maura could help with things around the house while Alina gets her mind right. I was grieving. My husband was distant. And slowly, Maura was everywhere I should have been. She left things. First, it was a scarf on the back of a chair. Then a lotion bottle in the bathroom. A week later, I opened the fridge and found a yogurt brand I hated, but Maura had mentioned it once over brunch. One afternoon, I came home from a walk and found her barefoot in my kitchen, sipping from my mug, the one my mom gave me on my wedding day. Irene said I could make myself at home, she said, breezy. You looked like you needed rest. I laughed awkwardly, too stunned to respond. I asked Callum about it that night. She's just trying to help. Don't make everything a battle, Alina, he said, not even looking up from his laptop. Everything started to spiral after that. I began to feel like a ghost in my own home. I found myself minimizing, maybe they didn't mean it that way. Maybe I'm being paranoid. But then, I noticed the ring missing. It was a small gold band with a delicate diamond cluster, simple, old-fashioned, deeply meaningful. After the funeral, I had worn it on a chain around my neck. When the chain broke, I placed it in my jewelry box. And now it is gone. I searched the entire house. I cried. I turned over cushions and pulled out drawers. Then, 3 days later, I passed by the guest room and saw the door cracked open. Irene was sitting on the bed, staring at her hand. She was wearing it. My mother's ring. I stood there, heart pounding. "That's mine," I said. "That's my mother's." She looked at me, slowly, as if I'd interrupted a fantasy. Then she smiled faintly. "This belongs to someone classier," she whispered, turning her hand slightly in the light. I didn't say a word. I walked away. I don't remember if I cried that night or just went numb. The next morning, the ring was back in the drawer. Not a word exchanged. Like it never happened. But it had. And I couldn't unsee it. Still, I stayed. That's the part one hate admitting. I think grief made me compliant. I didn't have the energy to fight. I kept thinking it would settle down. But it got worse. I caught Maura laughing softly on the porch with Callum one night. She was in my robe. When I asked him later, he said he didn't even notice. Then, one Sunday morning, I heard Irene and Maura talking on the patio while I poured coffee in the kitchen. "She's clinging to memories. You know how fragile some people get," Irene said. "Don't worry," Maura replied, "she's practically moved herself out emotionally. Give it time. Callum sees it too." I froze. That was it. I knew. I knew then I was being slowly, methodically, replaced. I didn't pack right away. I spent the day walking through my parents' favorite trail in the mountains. I needed strength. That night, I took only what I needed and left. I stayed with my friend Kyra for a while, then filed for separation. I didn't hear from Callum for almost a week after I left. I expected anger, maybe some desperate apology or excuses. What I got was silence. Kyra, bless her, didn't press me to talk. She gave me space in her guest room, let me cry when I needed to, and stocked her pantry with my comfort foods, saltines, peppermint tea, and those weird almond cookies my mom used to hoard. I was in survival mode. I wasn't thinking long-term yet. I just knew I couldn't walk back into that house. Not with Irene gliding around like she owned the place. Not with Maura folding Callum's laundry in front of the fireplace where I used to read to him. About 10 days after I left, I got a text from Callum, "We need to talk." "No, how are you? No, I miss you." Just an appointment. I agreed to meet him at a neutral place, a quiet little coffee shop halfway between Kyra's and the house. I showed up early, sipping a bitter Americano, tapping my fingers against the ceramic mug. He arrived 10 minutes late, no apology. He looked tired. Hair unkempt, dark circles under his eyes. He slid into the booth and didn't look at me right away. "I didn't know about the ring," he said first. "Irene didn't tell me she took it." I didn't respond. "She said she was just looking at it. Said she put it back. After she told me I wasn't classy enough for it?" I asked. He flinched. "She didn't mean that. She has opinions." "No, Callum. That wasn't an opinion. That was theft. And a deliberate slap in the face." He looked down. Things got messy. Messy. As if Maura lounging around in my bathrobe and Irene rifling through my memories was a bit of clutter that needed tidying up. "She was pawning my mom's jewelry," I said bluntly. That got his attention. "What?" I pulled out the photos Kyra had helped me take when I discovered the missing pieces. My mom had a small collection, modest pieces, nothing flashy, but sentimental. A pendant she wore every day. A bracelet I remember from every birthday party. Gone. They weren't in the safe anymore. I checked with a few pawn shops in town. Found 2 of the pieces. Irene used her own ID. She didn't even try to hide it. Callum sat back like I'd punched him. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. Silence stretched between us. The coffee cooled. Outside, the wind picked up, and a couple wrangled their toddler into a jacket, laughing gently. Normalcy, just outside the window. You really think I wanted to replace you? He asked quietly. I looked at him for a long moment. I don't think you planned it. I think you let it happen because it was easier. Because Irene never liked me, and Maura was what she wanted for you. And you didn't have the spine to push back. He didn't argue. That was almost worse than if he had. I left that meeting knowing I couldn't go back, not to him, not to the life I used to have. It had rotted from the inside while I'd been grieving. I was trying to keep the foundation together while they were upstairs planning how to redecorate without me. I began the legal process soon after. I found a lawyer, a kind, methodical woman named Pilar who took one look at my documentation and said, "This is going to be messy, but winnable." That's how I learned Callum had put Irene's name on the deed. 6 months before my mother passed. I nearly choked when Pilar told me. He'd never mentioned it. Never discussed it with me. She said it was for inheritance purposes, he explained later when I confronted him. So she could help us with taxes. She who? Irene? You took advice from your mother and signed away part of our house without telling me? He shrugged, like it was no big deal. She's family. I laughed. It was the kind of bitter, hollow laugh you give when you realize the person you married is just a stranger with your last name. We filed for separation officially that month. The court proceedings took longer than expected, partly because Callum tried to claim I had agreed to the deed transfer. Irene backed him up, of course. But the digital paper trail was in my favor. I'd never signed a thing. Then came the financial disclosures. Callum had been paying Maura for consulting on his business. Thousands of dollars. No contracts. No invoices. Just Venmo transfers are labeled strategy session and branding help. I showed those to my lawyer. It helped. So did the pawnshop receipts, the photos, and the text messages I'd started saving after things got weird. It all painted a clear picture. I'd been systematically pushed out, emotionally, physically, financially, while grieving the only family I had left. Still, they fought me. Irene tried to claim emotional damages from my accusations. Maura sent me a cease and desist after I told one of her Atlanta pharma clients what had happened. But in the end, the judge saw through them. I got the house. The jewelry. Even half of the business assets, because Maura was never officially employed, and the court agreed her contributions were basically gifts enabled by my shared marital funds. Irene's name was removed from the deed. They left the house a mess when they moved out. Trash bags, broken cabinet hinges, even a moldy pan left inside the oven. Petty, vengeful chaos. It took me weeks to clean it out. But I did. And when it was quiet again, just me and the creak of the old floors and the faint smell of lavender from my mom's diffuser, I sat down in my living room and felt like I could breathe for the first time in a year. It's strange how grief and betrayal can overlap in your mind. I've learned that it's possible to miss someone and resent them at the same time. That's what I was dealing with in the months that followed, especially on the quiet days. The ones where the house was too still, where the light through the curtains hit the same way it used to when my mom sat by the window, knitting or reading. I'd find myself looking around, almost waiting for her voice, or for my dad's boots to scuff the porch. But all I'd get were echoes of arguments I never had the courage to start. The ones I should have had with Callum the first time Maura crossed a line. The first time Irene raised her eyebrow and smiled like I was just visiting. The truth is, I'd seen it coming long before my parents passed. I just hadn't wanted to believe it. I spent a lot of time journaling during that period, filling pages with memories, timelines, things they said, things I said, or didn't. I wasn't trying to keep a record for court anymore. that part was over. I was trying to understand how I got so far from myself. And in those scribbles, I saw it. The patterns. How Irene's criticisms had started subtly. The way Callum would minimize them, say she didn't mean it that way. How she'd casually compare me to Maura even before Maura was a real presence in our lives. How she'd suggest things like, you should wear more structure in your clothes. It would help you look more put together. Like Maura does. Little things. Things I laughed off. Things I thought were generational differences. I told myself Irene just had strong opinions. That Callum was trying to keep the peace. That I was too sensitive. But now I realize that when you spend too long rationalizing someone else's behavior, you start to gaslight yourself. The more I unpacked, the more I remembered. Maura's early visits always came with something: cookies, a new throw pillow for the living room, a bottle of wine Callum liked. And always with a subtle jab. I thought the couch could use some color. It was looking a little tired. I'd thank her politely. Smile. Bite my tongue. Then she started calling Callum Cal. No one called him that. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged. She's been doing that since we were kids. But you don't like it, I'd said. He looked at me, paused, then muttered, it's fine. And that was the thing with Callum, everything was fine. Even when it clearly wasn't. When I moved back into the house, after the court ruling, I kept expecting to find pieces of them. Like an unwanted spiritual residue. But instead, it was oddly sterile. Like they'd already emotionally vacated long before they left. The closet was empty, except for a cheap scarf that wasn't mine and a dry cleaning tag with Maura's name on it. In the kitchen, Irene had taken most of the good silverware and left behind a cracked dish I hadn't seen since 2014. I walked through each room with a slow, methodical pace. Checked drawers, opened cabinets, opened windows. Let the air shift. Let it feel like mine again. And then, in the guest room, the one Irene used as her personal retreat, I found something unexpected. Inside the closet, wedged behind a box of unused linens, was a small, hardbound notebook. It was Irene's handwriting. I stood there for a long time, the weight of it in my hand. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew that. But I did. It wasn't a diary, exactly. More like notes, lists, observations. Some were harmless, like garden ideas. But some were not. There were lines that made my stomach twist. Maura fits in this space better. Doesn't brood. Matches Callum's energy. A's attachment to her parents is unnatural. Too much dependence. If A leaves on her own, it will be cleaner. No need for confrontation. I couldn't breathe. I had to sit down. I read it again and again, hoping maybe I was misinterpreting. But it was all there. The calculated nudging. The manipulations. The plan. She hadn't just wanted me gone. She'd orchestrated it. I took photos of every page. I sent a few of them to Callum. Not out of revenge, but because I needed him to know. I needed him to look at it and understand that this wasn't just my grief clouding my perception. This was real. He replied 4 days later. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know she was writing these things. I can't believe it. I don't know what to say. I didn't respond. What was there to say? By then, I had already started therapy again, this time focused on trauma, boundaries, and rebuilding self-trust. My therapist, a calm and perceptive woman named Anika, told me something that stuck with me. When you're raised in a loving environment, you assume everyone else operates on love. But some people operate on control. And love to them is a tool, not a feeling. I wrote that down. I still don't know if Callum truly understood what he allowed. Or if, deep down, he was relieved when Irene took the lead. But what I do know is this: he didn't stop it. He didn't stand up for me. And that silence was its own kind of violence. A few weeks later, I got a letter from Irene's lawyer. It was a cease and desist. For defamatory accusations and intentional emotional harm. I laughed. Then I handed it to Pilar, who laughed too and said, "Let them try." I didn't hear anything more after that. The house was starting to feel like home again. I began rearranging the rooms, not drastically, but enough to feel like I was reclaiming space. I painted the guest room. Got rid of the furniture Irene used. Donated most of it. Replaced it with a reading nook. I brought my mother's things out of storage. Her knitting bag. The wooden clock she loved. My dad's hiking boots are still in the closet. I don't wear them, but I like seeing them there. And the ring, her wedding ring, is back on a new chain around my neck. I had the chain reinforced, the clasp strengthened. It rests just above my heart. Where it belongs. Somewhere in the middle of the slow reclaiming of my life, I started sleeping through the night again. It seems like such a small detail, maybe even trivial, but for months, maybe even a year, I hadn't known what real rest felt like. I'd been waking up in the dark, my heart racing, mind spinning with fragments of imagined conversations, things I should have said, should have done. Sometimes, it was a sound. Other times, it was just a feeling, that someone was watching me, judging me, that I had overstayed in a home I was slowly being erased from. Now, with the house quiet and empty, the silence was different. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't tense. It was peaceful. It was mine. I started fixing things Irene had neglected. Cabinet doors that hung crooked. A leak under the sink that had been brushed off for months. It became almost therapeutic, tightening screws, replacing light bulbs, patching little holes in the walls. Some days, I found it hard to believe everything had happened. The emotional manipulation, the ring, Maura's eerie nonchalance as she inserted herself into my life as though I was simply a placeholder. Other days, it was all I could think about. I'd wander into the kitchen, remember her using my mugs, and feel like I needed to scrub the whole place down again. Kyra kept checking in. She'd drop off groceries even when I insisted I had enough. She'd text, still breathing, every few days, never expecting a full reply, just a pulse. And I'd send her a thumbs up, or a photo of a newly organized drawer. That was our code. That I was still moving forward. About a month after I'd gotten the house back, I received another letter. This one was handwritten. From Maura. It was short. Carefully worded. Clearly rehearsed. She wrote that she was deeply sorry for any pain she may have contributed to, and that she never intended to cause harm. Those things got complicated and she was guided by Irene's strong personality. She ended with, "I hope you find peace and healing, and that one day, you can see that I never meant to replace you, only to help." I didn't respond. I didn't burn the letter, either. I just placed it in the back of a file folder labeled, "Closure Attempts." Maybe one day I'd throw it out. Or maybe not. But I knew I'd never reply. The arrogance of framing her behavior as helping was almost laughable. She inserted herself, benefited from the unraveling of my marriage, took money from a shared account under the guise of consulting, and walked around my house in my robe, eating off my plates. No, Maura didn't help. She circled like a vulture and waited for grief to hollow me out enough for her to move in. And Callum. He just let it happen. I hadn't seen him since that coffee shop meeting. Occasionally, Pilar would forward communication from his lawyer. Mostly logistics, account transfers, final filings, confirmations. It was civil, but sterile. The way paperwork is when there's no soul left in a marriage. One night, I was sorting through old digital photos, trying to decide which to save and which to move to a hard drive I'd never open again. And I came across a video. It was from a vacation in 2016. We were in Blowing Rock for a weekend. My dad had just bought us this rustic little cabin stay as a surprise, and my mom insisted I record everything for the family scrapbook. In the video, we were around a fire pit. My dad was grilling marshmallows. My mom was laughing at something my husband had said. And there we were, Callum and I, wrapped in a blanket, looking like the kind of couple you'd put in a frame on a Hallmark shelf. I watched it twice. Then I closed the laptop. Grief is cruel in that way. It tugs at memories and makes you question if any of it was ever real. But I've come to understand that it was real. That moment was real. That love we had in that slice of time was real. But time moves forward. People evolve, or reveal who they've really been all along. What came later didn't erase what came before. It just changed the meaning. I was starting to rebuild routines now. I took a part-time position at the local archive downtown, helping with a digitization project. It was quiet work, and I liked it. The old files, the faded handwriting, the smell of paper and preservation. It felt like touching history gently, respectfully. A stark contrast to how my own history had been trampled and twisted. One of the volunteers there, an older man named Horace, reminded me of my dad. Not in a physical way, but in the way he told stories and seemed to appreciate the silence between them. He never asked too much. Just brought me tea sometimes and told me how his wife used to run circles around him with kindness. It was comforting, in a way that didn't demand anything from me. Then, unexpectedly, about 6 weeks into my return, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I don't usually answer unknown numbers, but something in me said to pick up. It was a nurse from a care home in Asheville. Irene had been moved there after a fall. Apparently, she had named me her local emergency contact on some medical form, likely long before she decided I wasn't worthy of her son or her approval. The nurse was polite. Said they'd tried another family, but no one was answering. Maura was unreachable. They didn't need anything urgent, just wanted to inform me of her condition. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. It was jarring. The woman who had tried to remove me from her son's life, who had insulted my grief and worn my mother's ring like a trophy, was now lying in a sterile room with no one coming for her. I thanked the nurse and hung up. I didn't visit. At least not then. I sat with the information, unsure how I felt. Some days, I felt nothing. Other days, a kind of distant pity. Not forgiveness. But something closer to detachment. She was no longer a villain in my story, just a closed chapter. The real challenge now was trusting myself again. Learning to listen to that voice I'd ignored for so long. The one that told me, this isn't okay. You're being erased. Stand up. Because that's what happens when you stay too long in a dynamic where your presence is tolerated but not cherished. You start to forget what being valued actually feels like. I hadn't dated. Hadn't even thought about it. My healing wasn't about replacing love. It was about rediscovering my own. Sometimes, when I walked through the house, I'd find little things that still made me pause, a photo, a souvenir, something Maura or Irene had left behind. I didn't rush to get rid of it all. That kind of catharsis doesn't always come from a trash bag or a bonfire. Sometimes, healing comes quietly. Like folding a blanket. Or repainting a wall. Or letting a memory pass through you without letting it root itself in your chest. Irene's fall had left her with a fractured hip and complications that required round-the-clock care. According to the nurse, Maura had been listed as a secondary contact, but when they tried to reach her, she said she couldn't take on that kind of responsibility right now and asked that they not call again. Apparently, Irene had become less lucid in the weeks after her injury. She was refusing meals, snapping at the staff, and often muttering about ungrateful family and inconsiderate girls. Sounded familiar. I didn't visit right away. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I needed time. I needed to be sure that walking into that building wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me shaken, or worse, vindicated in her belief that I would always come back, no matter how badly I was treated. But curiosity is a powerful thing. Closure, even more so. So 2 weeks after that call, I went. The care home was nice. Clean, well lit. The kind of place where you can tell they try, even when families don't show up. A nurse escorted me to her room. Irene was sitting by the window, staring blankly at the trees beyond the glass. Her hair was thinner, face paler, the sharp angles of age now more pronounced. She turned slowly when I entered. For a moment, her expression twisted into something between confusion and recognition. Then a frown. "I didn't think you'd come," she said, voice hoarse. "I'm not here for you," I replied calmly. "The nurse called. Said you didn't have anyone else showing up." Her lips pressed together. "Mora's busy." I didn't respond. "Callum?" she asked after a beat. "I wouldn't know," I said. There was a long pause. Then she shifted slightly in her chair and muttered, "You always thought you were better than us." I gave a dry laugh. "No. I just thought you'd treat me like family." "Silly me." She didn't argue. Maybe she was too tired. Or maybe, on some level, she knew there was no winning anymore. Her empire of manipulation had crumbled. Her golden niece had walked away. Her obedient son had stopped calling. And here I was, the one she tried hardest to break, the only person left willing to stand in front of her and speak plainly. I didn't stay long. Just long enough to let her see what survival looked like. What quiet strength really meant. Not dominance, not cruelty, but boundaries. Peace. Self-respect. As I left the room, I turned back and said one last thing. "You once told me my mother's ring belonged to someone classier." You were right. It did. Her. And now me. She didn't look at me. I walked out and never went back. But that wasn't the end. About 6 months later, something unexpected happened. An old coworker of mine from the library connected me to a journalist doing a feature on small-town inheritances and how family conflict can unravel over legacies, particularly sentimental ones. I hesitated, but after some reflection, I agreed to speak, anonymously at first. The story ran in a regional magazine, and it struck a nerve. The way I described my experience, being slowly erased during grief, being manipulated out of my own home, losing items of sentimental value, seemed to resonate with a lot of people. I had used pseudonyms and didn't name Callum, Mora, or Irene directly. But the emotional truth was there. And then came the email. From one of Mora's former colleagues in Atlanta. She had read the article and pieced things together. She wanted to speak privately, off the record. So we did. Turns out Mora's fall from grace hadn't stopped at Irene's care home door. Word of her ethical gray area consulting practices had made the rounds in her industry. Her reputation, once polished and bright, had become complicated. Apparently, she'd used Callum's startup involvement to pad her resume and make herself look like a high-level strategist. But when potential employers asked for references or outcomes from her work, things didn't quite add up. One company did a little digging, thanks to my article, and found discrepancies. Contracts that didn't exist. Claims of leadership roles that weren't real. They passed on her. Others did too. Soon, Mora had to leave Atlanta. She moved to a smaller city, started working lower-tier sales jobs. From what I heard, she was still chasing that image Irene had cultivated for her, but the shine had worn off. As for Callum, well, he eventually sold his stake in the startup. It never really took off. He tried freelancing, then pivoted to consulting. But his name was tied to Mora's exaggerated resume, and some doors closed because of it. People started associating him with poor judgment and nepotism. He reached out once. A short message. "You were right. About all of it. I'm sorry." I didn't respond. Because by then, I had already begun building something new. I'd taken on a project at the archive that turned into a full-time role, one that involved preserving the personal histories of local families. I'd started organizing grief circles at the community center, helping others move through loss and reclaim their voices. I was finally using the quiet strength my parents gave me not just to survive, but to help others do the same. And the house? I kept it. But I didn't just keep it, I made it mine. I repainted the walls, replaced the furniture, and planted a garden out back just like my mom had always wanted. Her wind chimes now hang by the back door. My dad's old compass sits on the bookshelf. And that wedding ring? It hangs on a new chain above my heart. Not as a symbol of loss anymore, but of survival. Of remembering who I was when everything else tried to make me forget. So no, I didn't burn bridges. I didn't scream or destroy lives. But in the quietest, most complete way, I won. And they all know it.